We're going to perform the indicated operation 2a divided by a squared minus 1 plus 1 divided by a squared plus a. So this is an addition of rational expressions. So the first thing we need to do is factor the denominators, because in order to add fractions we need to have a common denominator, and in order to form a common denominator we need to know what the factors are for the denominators that we have. So for the first fraction here, the denominator is the difference of squares, so it's going to factor into a minus 1 times a plus 1. And for the second fraction here, we have a greatest common factor of a, which we can factor out, and we're left with the binomial a plus 1. So now we need to find a least common denominator for our two fractions here, and we'll start off by including the factors from the first fraction. So that's a minus 1 times a plus 1, and then we also need to include the factors from the second fraction here. So there's the factors from the first fraction. Those happen to already include one of the factors from the second fraction, so I need to include the other factor of a, and now we can see we have a denominator that includes all of the factors from both of the fractions. So now we've identified our least common denominator as a minus 1 times a plus 1 times a. The next step is to write each of our original fractions so that it has the common denominator. The first fraction already has the factors a minus 1 times a plus 1, so we need to have it have a factor of a as well. So we'll multiply the numerator and the denominator of that fraction by a so that we have the same, haven't changed the value, we've just changed the way it looks. And our second fraction already has the factors a and a plus 1, so for it to have the common denominator we need to multiply the numerator and denominator of this fraction by a minus 1. So we haven't changed its value, we've just changed the way it looks. When we continue to the next step, we're going to leave our denominators in factored form, because that's going to help us on the last step to be able to simplify. So we'll just go ahead and rewrite both of those denominators, and we'll multiply out the numerators. 2a times a is going to be 2a squared, and 1 times a minus 1 is going to be a minus 1. And in our last step here, we're going to keep that common denominator, a times a plus 1 times a minus 1, and add together the numerators. So that's going to be 2a squared plus a minus 1. So now our fractions are added, and we just need to verify whether or not this fraction is reduced. In order to do that, we need to factor the numerator. And we'll keep our denominator in its factored form, a times a plus 1 times a minus 1. So that first term, 2a, is going to 2a squared is going to come from multiplying a 2a times an a, and then our last term there is negative 1, so we need 1 times 1, and one of those needs to be positive and one of those needs to be negative in order for us to multiply them together and get a negative 1. And we can check this. If we multiply the 2a times the a, we get 2a squared. If we multiply the 2a times the minus 1, the plus 1, and the minus 1 times the a, we'll get plus a. And if we multiply negative 1 times positive 1, we'll get negative 1. And we can see that we have a common factor of a plus 1 in our numerator and our denominator. So our final answer is going to be 2a minus 1 divided by a times a minus 1. I hope you found this helpful.